masks fell, he would have waited for instructions from the cockpit. The flight attendants sitting at the front of the plane would have done the same, but none of them would have waited forever.
We made it an issue at Ilios to emphasize that cabin crew should not entirely depend on their procedures, but to think on their feet and to adapt to any impending situation.
In most depressurizations, the plane descends quickly. But as minutes passed on the Helios flight, the plane continued to climb. Unsure of what was going on, Prodromou would have tried to contact the flight crew.
Captain Merton.
But he gets no response.
Can you give us an update, please? Captain Merton.
With no word from the cockpit, he would have soon realized that this was not a typical depressurization.
When there was no call out from the cockpit and the aircraft didn't start an emergency descent, there was absolutely no protocol. They would be winging it.
By now, Prodromou must have felt that something was terribly wrong. But to find out what the problem was, he had to leave his seat.
The oxygen available on the 737 is, of course, the dropout oxygen. 10% of those masks are available for the crew in case of a depressurization incident. There are extra masks per every seat row.
Taking advantage of the extra passenger masks, he could have made his way to the front of the plane, a process cabin crew called monkey swinging. But if more than 12 minutes had passed, his girlfriend and the other flight attendant may have still been in their seats, and like the passengers, overcome by hypoxia. But Prodromou was a scuba diver and a former soldier in the Cypriot Special Forces. His training may have helped him to stay alert a little longer.
Andreas was not a coward. He was a brave person. Fearless, brave and very calm.
But to survive after the passenger oxygen system stopped working, he needed another solution. The 737 had 4 portable oxygen bottles. Each one could last more than an hour. All 4 bottles were found at the crash site. 3 of them appeared to have been used. Prodromou in the cockpit just before the crash. It may not have been the first time he had gone in. As he did at the end of the flight, he could have used the security code to unlock the door earlier.
The procedure would be to enter the flight deck via the cockpit door. Initially to bang on the door, and then, if no response is forthcoming, to enter the code and enter the flight deck.
During the accident investigation, DNA was discovered on an oxygen mask in the cockpit that matched the co-pilot's. It's possible Prodromou used it to try and revive him.
You can still revitalize somebody for quite an extended period of time if you get to them before major brain damage is set in. And that's somewhat a variable situation depending on the person, depending on how long they're exposed to a high altitude.
But if he was in the cockpit earlier, why did he leave? No one will ever know.
Probably was a little bit disoriented, a little bit confused. He's reacting a lot slower than he normally would.
What was his state of mind? What was his physical condition? We think that he knew what was really the problem, but is that the real situation? It's a real question.
After 3 hours in the air, everyone who didn't have bottled oxygen would have been unconscious. As it approached Athens, Flight 522 was now a ghost plane.
Most of the victims, they probably still had heartbeats when the airplane crashed, but almost certainly were in an irreversible coma.
Hypoxia is no more painful than falling asleep. But for Andreas Prodromou, the flight must have been a nightmare. As the F-16s roared to meet the jet, and with his oxygen running out, he must have known that he too was almost out of time. Yet to the very end, he didn't give up. Prodromou made one last attempt to save the plane. When he returns to the cockpit, the young flight attendant who dreamed of becoming a pilot calls for help. But no one can hear him, probably because the radio was still tuned to Larnaca, the airport on Cyprus where the flight had taken off. Fighting hypoxia and struggling to control an airplane larger than any he had ever flown, Prodromou was in an impossible situation. Even if he could have landed the plane, it was now too late. Flight 522 was out of time and fuel. There are pictures of Andreas in Cyprus, in the cemetery where he and his girlfriend Charis are buried side by side.
As his father, my son is in front of me. Wherever I go, he's always there. He left a very big gap. We will never get over it.
There are pictures in Greece, too. On the hill north of Athens where Helios Flight 522 crashed, there are faded photographs of many of those who died. Bleached by the brilliant Mediterranean sun, they gaze over the rugged, ancient terrain, silent witnesses to one of the world's most bizarre and tragic airline disasters.